Welcome to the Worthy Ground Exchange. This series is about slowing down and making space for the people doing the work of recovery in Appalachia to share what they're learning, what they're building, and what they want to understand about this moment in our region. Too often after disasters, stories are rushed, extracted, or told without long term care for the communities they come from. Worthy Ground Exchange exists to center local voices, lived experience, and the kind of knowledge that only comes from staying. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Crystal Good, the founder and editor of Black by God, West Virginia. We're talking about the role of community journalism after disaster, why local storytelling matters, and what gets lost when outside narratives take over, and how journalism can be a tool for accountability, healing, and long term recovery. Crystal brings deep roots, care, and clarity to this work, and I'm grateful to learn from her today. Hi, Crystal. Thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, Ella.
Can you just get us started? Tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you're doing in West Virginia.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. Um, the hat I wear today is as founder and publisher of Black by God, the West Virginian. We started in 2020 with the print publication, and as you know, 2020 was a different moment in time. We were in the middle of a global pandemic. We were having what I would call a racial reckoning in America through Black Lives Matter, and here I pop out with a print newspaper centering Black voices in Appalachia, and it worked. And 2026, we're still going, and at the heart of that is community journalism, citizen journalism. You know, when you're bootstrapping a paper, I was dependent on people to help edit, people to help write. And it really started to show me. The talent that we have in our communities, the interest that we have in our communities, and how there's sometimes a barrier between, I guess, what people would call big journalism and little journalism, kind of how people say like big art, little art. It's all ridiculousness, but we're all storytellers, and that's the thing. We all have a Facebook page. We all have these platforms. We're all telling stories, right? It's just how to share that in a who, what, when, where, why, how, and what do you want people to do? Journalism ethics and standards that I think people just needed a reframing on. And so when Black by God started, we started with the people power, not just to fund the paper, but to produce the paper and distribute the paper. So, Willa, I am in the heat of two issues right now. We're doing one for Black Policy Day, which is an annual event in Charleston, West Virginia at the Capitol, where people come from all over West Virginia, and App Studies, which is coming up in March. And so, the wheels are turning, but I'm thankful to be doing a print paper because as it connects to citizen journalism, as it connects to communities that may be without internet, communities that may, there's all kinds of problems that a print paper can serve to a community that I think in this digital age, we sometimes forget that, right? And so, the prints to me are precious and they're special, and, glad that we can archive them in a digital format, but there's still nothing like a print paper.
It's interesting that COVID is really what helped launch you because, or really like inspired the creation of this work. Because one thing I've been talking a lot about in Worthy Ground Exchange is like we are covering natural disaster recovery, but what we learn from disaster recovery in general is that disasters come in many forms. And this work really has a way of capturing those experiences so that we're learning from them. Can you talk a little bit about what you all learned from those early days during the pandemic and telling this story?
Well, I think it's interesting that Black by God also started with a foundation that was built off of people who supported my disaster poetry. For many years, traveling the region as an Appalachian poet, and a lot of folks really celebrated the poems I wrote, Boom Boom, and Black Diamonds, that were about disasters. These were about mine disasters. These were about a chemical spill in the valley. I always used to joke, I wish I could write love poems, but, maybe they are love poems. But, the disaster recovery and the way that we use language and storytelling to come together and to preserve that moment has been a part of my storytelling in the region for a long time. It just sort of manifested into into Black by God. I really wasn't quite making that connection until you said that, Willa. But, to have that foundation of readers and followers and people that could support the paper, because I look at Black by God as an information highway, right? It's an information highway, and it's my job to build it so that we can put on the information highway what we need to when we need to, because the next disaster is coming. And so I am very motivated, because we've all lived through a global pandemic now, but if you've lived through some of the disasters that I've lived through, you're mindful. You're mindful of, how am I going to get my information, and you're already setting up those resources. And I know that, and that there will be one. Right. And I hope that Black by God is in a position to support folks on the ground with quality information. But in the in between, right, and is that we're really building our folk reporters program, which is citizen journalism, encouraging people to attend public meetings. Right now, when we're taping this, is at the time of the West Virginia legislature. And so we have folk reporters covering that. But our hope is that we can have folk reporters across Appalachia in communities, so that folks will go listen to their public service commission. They'll be able to announce, when there's public comments and public hearings and things like that, because we know journalism is shifting and changing. Some local newsrooms have one reporter, two reporter. They can't cover everything. And even if they do, sometimes it seems to be the same story, just three different media outlets. You know what I'm saying? And there's so much more going on. And so we hope that the Folk Reporters program, and it is, will be a way for people to get engaged civically, share good information, and start to learn the political process, right? Because especially now, as we're moving into what I would call disaster capitalism, somebody needs to be minding those budgets and paying attention, and who's getting paid and what's going on. And that's what journalism can do. It can ask the questions. It can do the FOIA. And if everyday citizens understand these tools that they have and have a platform to share it, I think we're doing something. I think we can do something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And community journalism, for those of us who work in the field, kind of see the scope of it. But for those who are newer to the idea of community journalism, could you explain your model a little bit at Black by God? Like, you have folk reporters, like how many folks are working with you, and how does that model work for you all?
Well, I never stepped foot in a newsroom until I had my own newspaper. Some people tell me that's quite an advantage in many ways as media starts to change. But I understand language, I understand people, I understand community, I understand storytelling, right? And so maybe some of the things I don't know allowed me to be quite ambitious. One of the things that I do know is that, journalism is, the way I explained it, is very analog. You talk to people. You get different perspectives, you collect those, you do the research. And I think community journalism is a collective storytelling voice, right? And it's passing the mic to people that might not be considered journalism. And I love encouraging that. I love it when people write. And now we're in a different world because we have ChatGPT. We didn't quite have that before, so that brings its own challenges, but also opportunities. So, community journalism to me is how is our platform participatory, right? And community and citizen journalism to me is the same thing. That's just where folks are writing stories that don't have quote unquote journalism degrees, or we have a 12-year-old reporter. We also have a 79-year-old reporter. You know what I'm saying? So, and they don't always see themselves that way, because they don't have a journalism degree. That doesn't make any sense. Or they've never written before. They haven't seen their byline, but it's important. And I love to see the participation.
Yeah, and when you have a region that has its own specific needs and uniqueness, sometimes that journalism degree has been shaped for a whole different set of people, and it doesn't translate in how you capture or tell the story. So that's what I love about your model, is that it you may not have the journalism degree, but you have the cultural experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You know what I'm saying? Like people will get into debates about style and AP and this and that. Is it telling the truth? Who, what, when, where, why, and how? right? I think I literally said the other day, which is so terrible because I have a newspaper. It's like, I could spell a town wrong. Like, you can have a misspelling, but you cannot mess up a fact. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And I was like, that's really not good journalism advice. But, the point is, right? Like, if my sentence structure is incorrect, but the majority of my readers know that,
Yes.
who's incorrect? Right. So, I don't always give hard edits that way, because my style is you should write the way you talk, but you should also, we have these guidelines and rules so that we're clear and people can understand and they can read through it, you know what I mean, without disruption and all those rules to writing. But it's beautiful. And it's beautiful to think about our platform, Black by Guide, where I really encourage people, you don't have to explain Blackness. Consider your audience to be Black. There's certain things you don't need to say. It is still hard sometimes because you want to put Black, African American, you know what I mean, before each descriptive, and we try not to. We just try to center Black people even in that perspective, which is so different than traditional media, because you rarely read any other race prefacing kind of the the person. That makes sense.
No, that's fascinating. I mean, that's such a good point, and it just hits home. Like, you are writing for the reader, and you don't have to describe the reader to the reader.
Yeah. And yeah, and even if the reader is white, you know what I'm saying? Let them start to see how their own imagination has bended things to create. You know what I mean? Every time when you're starting to imagine the story that you're reading and who it's about and who the people are.
Um, some of the stories, especially the last 5 to 10 years, have been around natural disasters, and I know West Virginia has had its fair share of flooding and storm recovery. Can you talk a little bit about what that has looked like for Black by God, um, and how you are covering the region, and what it means to emotionally and professionally live and work in a region that's facing these challenges?
Well, I mean, right now I'm just overcome with guilt. I'm not doing enough, right? Like I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. Which I think is part of the fatigue that the region carries. And so, and sometimes you just don't want to look. You know what I'm saying? It's like when I say that, I mean, you know, it is trauma. It is trauma if you have lived through disasters. It is trauma when your neighbors have lived through disasters. It is trauma, and you don't want to become numb or neutral to that, right? But you have to stay mindful of yourself. So, part of me, Willa, is very focused on, like I said, building the information highway. We don't have the staff, we don't have the resources. You know what I mean? We don't have. We've recently just applied for a grant, and if we are able to get that grant, then we could hire a reporter that could just focus on. On environmental issues and things, and that kind of thinking is really important for us because I want to cover everything. There's only, we don't have a full time reporter actually, other than, you know what I mean? Like, so, staff wise, capacity wise, that's why the Folk Reporters program is important. That's why, all of these things. But, I think actually, though, that's the article I need to write, which is about the fatigue, especially in storytelling or trying to document, right? And the responsibility, and how you have to pace yourself, and it's, but it's also a beautiful, because somebody is carrying it. It's almost like, here, you carry this for a little bit, I'll carry this for a little bit, kind of a beautiful passing, of responsibility. And people are coming up with new ideas and new ways to document. I will say this though, in our storytelling world, especially around this, I think one of the most important things that we can do is recognize that we have an archive, right? We're always trying to, because there's going to be another disaster. We need to tell this. We're always kind of like looking ahead, right? And I think that we need to look back, because so many of the stories, right, are still relevant, still important, right? Plenty of nonprofits are sitting on content. plenty of, agencies and folks are sitting on stories, from a long time ago. And sometimes I think we need to look back so we can see, one, how far we've come, how far we haven't come. But also, we want those stories to carry on. They are precious. Somebody has given you their story during the most fragile, intimate time, right? So I think we have, this has kind of been sitting with me because it's like, wait a minute, we're all sitting on like archives of content and we're just leaving it there, right? Instead of finding ways to keep those stories alive because we're looking for the next one, right? I don't know if that resonates with you or not, but
No, it for sure does, and it speaks to a lot of the challenges I have with the Worthy Ground project. Is that to start to even start the process of telling about Worthy Ground, I had to tell my own story as a survivor.
mm-hmm.
And I sort of made the joke one day to my colleagues, like, I've had to edit my own tears all day today. Like, I had to edit my own interview of me crying about losing my home. And now, one day a colleague said, take a dance break. And now that's sort of what I tell myself. Like, whether or not I'm actually getting up and dancing is a whole other thing. But like, when it gets heavy, take a break and walk away, because this is our lived experiences. This is our home. That trauma impacts us. And then at the same time, I think when you are telling responsible stories in your own community, and it's a community that's been built off the back of extraction, you often think, how do I make this story not feel extractive? How do I capture the story in a way that lifts up my community, pushes it to be better, but doesn't extract its trauma and its pain?
Right.
And I guess, yeah, it's a question I would give to you, but I don't know that, any of us have the answer yet. It's like, how do we sort through that feeling of telling a balanced story in our community where there is trauma, but also we see the hope, we see the beauty, and we see the possibility?
Well, I think, part of that is giving people the space to tell their story, and then there's no right or wrong. You know what I mean? It's there's no, when you can get that testimony from somebody and document it, and like I said, have it in the archive. Um, I think that's part of how you tell the stories. You create the space for people to feel safe enough to share their story. I mean, I'm just having a lot of flashbacks now of being in, a flood zone, talking to people about their story, and you're kind of like, you know, but so many times when I've been in those spaces, people have wanted to tell their story. It's almost like it's this thin kind of like space between like you feel invasive, you know, but then someone is like, no, I lost all my shit. Take a picture, right? Take this picture.
Yes.
And that feels empowered. You know what I mean? And that's why I want to have a bigger platform. You know what I mean? So that these stories can be amplified, right? So people can see and share. And I don't know if that I don't know if sometimes as a storyteller, journalist, eh, that's what needs to be done. The archive needs to be created, right? And I think the guilt comes in because I want to connect everybody to resources. I want to make sure I'm helping follow the policy around this. I want to make sure all these things, but you know, sometimes when someone's trusted you with their story in that most delicate space or as they're reflecting on it, I mean, what an honor. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people who feel unseen or underrepresented often need that space to
Mhm.
feel heard, to even start to heal.
Mhm.
So I think it's very important. It's hard for you to capture it and wonder, like, where will this go? But then also you can see, like, people need to talk about this too. Um, you're talking about this archive, and I'm loving this idea and this thought process you're having. And I'm thinking about this as part of why we're having this exchange is, how do we work together in this region to, you know, carry and lift up what each other is doing not just us here and not just Black by God, but so many storytellers across the region. What would be your hope for the future of like how we as communicators are connecting better, to sort of
We
lift
really
up the
do. We
story
need to get
together?
it together. We need to get it together. Like we need to build a network of storyteller and share content and then also share our archives, share our books. Like we're not, and I say this because I'm part of it, like we kind of just depend on word of mouth or this, you kind of get tunnel vision because you work with this agency. No, we really do need this aggregate, right? Like we have tools and resources now so that, I could go in and say I'm interested in West Virginia water issues, blah 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 blah. Who's written stuff about this within the region, or how does this connect? I don't know. I'm trying to think fast. It's not working. But I think there's so many things that we could do to build, connectors. And I think that should be prioritized. I don't know whose job that is. But I do think that one of the beautiful things of how, I mean, we've met before, but how we're kind of engaging now through CAN is that they're a network of networks. And I think that's what storytellers in Appalachia need. We need to be networks of networks, and realize that just like when a disaster, we switch up mutual aid and we do this and we do that, and the way that we pass off information when it's critical, we can create those structures pretty quickly, right? And that we need to do that in a more structured way across the region, so then that feels critical. That feels critical to, you know what I mean? Like disaster work. I don't care if the story is about some bitty ball team that did something fantastic. You know what I'm saying? Like people that read that might not, like it has to be a mix of stories, at least on Black by God's end. But I do believe, we need to build a network of networks of storytellers and documenters.
Yeah, yeah, and it's happening. I think mutual aid. You talked about mutual aid has been a great example of how people are crossing state lines to build those networks amongst each other, and like learning lessons from each other. This happened in North Carolina during Helene. This happened during the floods in 2022 with
Yeah,
Kentucky. What are
yeah,
the lessons we learned? How do we
yeah,
talk about this?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's my hope too, to see that for communications and storytelling in the region.
Yes, let's make it happen.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, can you tell me a little bit about your hope moving forward for Black by God and community journalism as you look forward to, say, the next 5 years? Where do you hope to go, and what do you hope to see happen?
No potholes on the information highway. Well, now I'm excited about a network of creators and what could happen in the next 5 years. One thing that's changed for Black by God is because there is now nonprofit newsrooms. I'm able to run content from 100 Days of Appalachia or, Mountain State Spotlight, West Virginia Watch. I'm able to run free content, which is so important, investigative content, the kind of content that I'm not today have the capacity to really do. And so, building more on that, next 5 years, I'd love to have a nice Black by God investigative piece. Something's brewing about disaster capitalism. Something's brewing, you know what I mean, about like what's going on with these insurance payouts. I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot, I think that there is to look at post flood, you know? So one, I hope we're still around, but I'm feeling pretty good about that. I really am, and excited because this year we've kind of we've been fortunate enough to receive our largest grants. I don't know what you call it. Our biggest year for grants, and kind of learning how that works. You know what I mean? It's taken me some time, and we're able to build a staff and just keep going. I think in the future also it's more multimedia for us, and just being nimble to change with as these platforms, you know what I mean, as these platforms ebb and flow. But that's why we still got a good old print. So
Amazing. Thank you so much, Crystal. And if you had advice for someone in a community where they see the gap in storytelling, they see this lack of coverage for their home community? What piece of advice would you give someone?
Well, I think it's so important that people write op-eds. I think it's so important that you use your own voice in a consistent way, right? So if you're passionate about something and you know what I mean, like you have to become that reporter, or you have to start sharing information about the thing that you care about and make it true. You know what I mean? And do your fact checking and make sure it's not AI, and you know what I mean, like all of these things. So, I think we all have our own piece of responsibility. I think we need to look at news as an information sharing as a critical part, because we are in this technology age. And if you didn't see it, smell it, taste it, or touch it, right, then you better know that you should know Willa, because you know her and you know that she's telling the truth because she saw it, smelled it, tasted, touched it. She's telling you about it. So, I think that's it. I can't give a piece of advice other than to you do the best you can with your own voice.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in today to Worthy Ground Exchange. To learn more about Crystal's work, you can check out blackbygod.org. Crystal, you have any other plugs you'd want to give for anything you'd like people to see or check
Be a
out?
folk reporter. Be a folk
Yes.
reporter. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you next time.
All righty. Bye bye.